Thank you. We're live on stream now. Um, I'd like to take this opportunity to warmly welcome you, Sir David King, and thank you once again for your time and for joining us for this conversation, which is most valuable to us. So thank you very much once again. And I'd like to start by conveying a very warm welcome to everyone who's joining us here today via stream and in person in on Zoom. A warm welcome to the POP Climate Leadership Conversations, a tribute to our chief mentor. This project aims to strengthen youth leadership and explore tactics that empower the youth to take action and tackle the most pressing environmental issues faced globally. We are conducting a series of conversations on leadership strategies, recommendations, reflections, and examples, each focused on global leadership and a different pressing environmental issue. This initiative is designed and implemented as a tribute to our chief mentor, late Dr. R.K. Pachauri. Today, we have the pleasure of speaking with Sir David King, who is the former UK government's chief scientific advisor and former UK special representative for climate change, about leadership needed for climate repair strategy. A very warm welcome, Dave. It's such a pleasure to have you here with us. Thank you once again for making the time. And we're deeply honored to be able to be in conversation with you here today. Thank you once again. And with that, I'll hand over to Anna. Thank you, Anna.
Thank you so much. I will now go ahead and introduce our guest speaker for the day. Sir David King is the UK government's former chief scientific advisor. He has founded the Centre for Climate Repair at Cambridge, a global research and development hub, in order to realize the goal of moving beyond decarbonization by researching and funding technologies to remove CO2 from the atmosphere. Sir David King served as the Foreign and Commonwealth Office's Special Representative for Climate Change from 2013 to 2017. Prior to that, he was the UK government's chief scientific advisor and the head of the Government Office of Science from October 2000 to December 2007. During his time, he raised the profile of the need for governments worldwide to act on climate change and was instrumental in creating the new 1 billion Energy Technologies Institute. Thank you so much, Dave, for joining us today. We are very excited to have you here, and I will now like to hand it over to Dr. Ash for the first question.
Thank you so much, Anna and David. Delighted to be here together with you. And thank you once again for this insightful conversation. I was wondering if we could start the conversation by seeking your insight on what you think leadership means, especially within the realm of climate repair strategy and the role of youth, please. Thank you.
This is a critically important question, Ash, because we all know what a difference a committed leader who fully understands the burden ahead of us can make in whatever position they have. The leadership in companies, I have seen 50 companies being transitioned through CEOs who understood the need for change and who had the qualities of leadership. I just a few words about the qualities of leadership. It really is important to understand that leadership is primarily about the ability to listen to others. It's so important. For example, I advise the government of Rwanda, and I am there as frequently as I can. And that is a country that trusts me because they know that I will listen to the people. And I have never made any advice to the president without first talking not only to ministers and policymakers, but to the people themselves. It is so critically important for a leader to be able to listen to the people that he or she is planning to lead. So the quality of listening is also important. It's not just a matter of I heard them speak. It really is a matter of trying to get into their shoes and understand the position from their point of view. If I was a half decent negotiator in the run up to COP 2015, I think it would be not because I represented Britain in those negotiations, but that I felt I represented humanity and I respected every country that I went into for the problems they had, and I wanted to really understand it. So I actually made 96 official country visits in 2.5 years in the run up to the Paris Agreement. And I'm going to say, without that, I don't think there would have been an agreement in Paris, because it's talking to local people and to local governments, policy advisors, that leads you into a position of leadership. So it's a very much a two-way process. You have to absorb the information you're getting in that way and turn it into the ability to then take those people with you. I think these qualities are right across the board, whether you're going to be CEO of a company, whether you're planning to lead youth people, young people, the new leaders of the future, whatever position of leadership you want to hold, these are essential qualities. It is an understanding of your own being dependent on the being of others, and really always respecting their being in the world and the position they come from. You may be critical, and that is fine, but be critical from the point of view of understanding them.
That is such an important principle to adopt for leadership, and perhaps in every realm of one's life. So I just wanted to say thank you for sharing that and for exemplifying it. And I imagine that it's there's so many nuances, especially as you start to interact with people from different cultures and countries. And like you said, in the run-up to the COP, you visited 96 countries, listened to not just the heads of states, but also to the people. And I imagine that as you move from one context to the next, there's so many things to be able to be sensitive to be able to really do that successfully. I wondered if you had any specific insights as or examples of your experience that you'd like to share with us, because I think this is a very, very important aspect. And at the pop movement, we work with young people from everywhere, and I think as we create networks, this is a crucial practice for all. Thank you.
So I think the second quality is integrity. It is so important to maintain a high level of integrity. The most valuable property I believe I have is my integrity. I had to explain to Tony Blair when I was appointed as Chief Scientific Advisor, Prime Minister, when I give you advice, I will go out into the public domain and tell them the advice I have given you. And if you can't accept that, you shouldn't appoint me. But the advantage is I get the trust of the public, and I know I have to keep your trust as well. So the advice I give you has to be very, very carefully delivered. And Blair accepted that. And that was the way I operated throughout. I could never have my arm twisted to say, I've changed my advice to government, right? There were efforts to do that. So I think we've just got to understand the importance of integrity. But the second thing, I give you a very simple example. I'm a South African by birth and upbringing. I was educated all the way to PhD in South Africa. And then the government of the day kicked me out of the country. I had never left South Africa when I was kicked out of the country. And this was the time when Mandela was picked up in 1962, and then I was picked up in the wash-up of his operation in 1963. Right, so I was against the apartheid regime, but I was not openly because I knew this was illegal. So I then go back to the new South Africa under Mandela's leadership, and I'm talking about climate change out there. And so then the miners' union leadership invited me to speak to them. And it was interesting because they were very respectful of my past, and they addressed me in the best way they could. They called me Comrade King, right? So it's the only time I've been called comrade. And I accepted this as it was meant as a compliment. And they said to me, "You are telling us that coal is yesterday's material for energy, and our coal miners will all lose their jobs. What have you got to tell our miners?" And what I had to do was explain to them that I'm not talking to coal miners and saying, "I'm sorry, you should abandon coal mining." Of course I'm not. What I am going to say to you as a miners' union is, please negotiate with your government. You can retrain the miners to work, for example, in the Kalahari Desert to produce photovoltaic farms to create the energy instead of from coal, from sunlight. So it's all a question of, yes, I was really pleased to be invited by the miners, and yes, I knew they were going to try and give me a hard time. But I don't think one should ever duck that or even duck the questions. Again, always integrity first and foremost. I know it's very tempting, particularly in the political domain, for people to sometimes, I'm going to use the word lie, and we do see it happening time and again. And the result of that is that the population loses the trust of the political figures. And once you've lost your trust, you can't regain it, right? So I think integrity and trust go hand in hand.
That's I can imagine oftentimes a very challenging situation, especially as there are pressures from many different domains, and maintaining one's integrity and position and being firm about that is critical. And I just, yeah, thank you for sharing that, and the incredible, example as well, because these are things I think, as young people and as people, and no matter where from or what age, is critical as a value to keep close to one's heart and practice no matter what. So I want to thank you very much for sharing that, because I think these are key things, especially as I know that a number of young people are listening to this conversation, and for us to keep in mind that these are key values no matter what we do, and no matter where we go, and especially as we communicate with groups that may exert pressure and may have the ability to do that. It's important to stay strong and keep close to one's position and integrity in terms of a key value as well. So thank you so much, Dave, for sharing that. And with that, I'll hand over to Anna to take us forward, please. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Ash, for that question. And thank you, Dave, for the answer. I really enjoyed what you were saying about integrity and the importance of maintaining trust. I would now like to hand it over to Nahid Perez from Mexico, who will be asking the next question.
Thank you, Anna. Hello, sir. My question for you is, what is needed in order to change our perspectives and start viewing ourselves as a part of the natural world? And what would the effects of this transition be?
Again, this question, Nahid, is so important. I think for hundreds of years, our economies, the global economy, beginning with the Industrial Revolution in particular, has been totally disrespectful to the natural world. We have considered ourselves to be apart from the natural world, whereas in fact, of course, we are a part of the natural world. The A must be separated from the part. And this is perhaps the most important cultural revolution that is needed for us in the 21st century. I say it's a cultural revolution, but actually, if we go back in the past, we can find teachings from the old leaders, whether it's the Buddhist leaders or whether it's from the Tao leaders in China, and you will find the stress on the natural world and the respect that we have to hold for it. What we are learning now is something that I think every scientist should fully understand, which is we evolved over the last millennia together with the evolution of every other species on the planet and the geological systems of the planet. We co-evolved. And so when we, humanity, emerged, we emerged into an ecosystem where the amount of oxygen in the air was perfect for us. The amount of carbon dioxide in the air was perfect for plant matter, so that we were in steady state with the plants and trees on the earth. We could breathe out carbon dioxide, they could take it in. And that steady state provided us with the ability to survive. And now we have, out of disrespect for the natural world, we have created the worst challenge our civilization has ever had to face up to. In other words, we have treated the atmosphere as a dustbin for our activities. We have simply used fossil fuels without concern for what we were doing. This is certainly true more recently because the scientists have been telling us that we are in danger of doubling greenhouse gases in the atmosphere. And we all understand that if we are lying in bed and we're cold, we put a duvet over us or a blanket to keep us warmer. But if you put two duvets over your bed, you'll get too hot. And of course, we are now in exactly that position. The greenhouse gas levels in the atmosphere were 275 parts per million back in the pre-industrial period and going back for hundreds of thousands of years. And now we're at 500 plus parts per million, not 415. That's just carbon dioxide. Methane is really a very serious greenhouse gas, and emissions are increasing. We're at something like 508 parts per million now. We're in a very dangerous place. It's far too much, as we are now. So yes, we need to act, and we need to act quickly to repair the damage. But the biggest part of your question is repairing the damage to ourselves and our culture, right? So your question leads me to what's in China they're now calling eco-civilization. And I do believe this is a very good word. I was invited to China to speak to an eco forum, and I summarized their 2-day meeting, 12,000 people attending in reality, not just in the way we're talking now. And what I said was, if you go back to the teachings of Confucius and Tao and Buddhist, you will see the emphasis being placed on respect for the natural world because we are part of it. And we have just lost contact with it. And I congratulated the Chinese and I said, you've come up with this phrase eco-civilization, which we in the West would not think of, but we have to learn from your culture. But your own culture has now been seriously diverted by ours. The rampant consumerism that is driving us into this position around the world exists in Shanghai and Beijing. You only have to go there to see it with your eyes. So I do think we need to really work on this cultural transition. It's extremely difficult because you're challenging the very economic system that has brought so much well-being to people around the world. And what I'm not criticizing the free market capitalist system for what it has done for the world. I'm just saying it's not fit for purpose into the future. We actually are talking about economics because the economic system puts zero value on the natural world. However much we talk about putting a value within that capitalist system, I'm not sure that it works. right? Unless you actually put a big charge on emitting carbon dioxide and methane and so on. So thank you for your question. I think it's so important and so difficult to make that transition.
Thank you for your question, sir. Now I'll hand it over to Anna.
Thank you so much for that great answer. I think it was really interesting what you were saying about how we have evolved at certain conditions and now we are destabilizing this not only for ourselves but also for other species. I would now like to hand it over to Cherry from South Korea, who will be asking the next question.
All right, thank you, Anna, for the yielding, and thank you, Dr. Sir David, for the answer about how we could do the transition and entering the eco-civilization and sort. My question is, since climate change is already having severe consequences in many parts of the world, and what is needed to keep the temperature rise below 1.5 degrees? So what can the world leaders do to achieve this goal, and what can youth do or play a role in this process?
Each of your questions is just so important. Thank you. So first and foremost, what we need across the world, and I'm talking about everyone, humanity, is to understand that we have a very short timeline ahead of us to manage the transitions needed to create a safe future. I am saying to everybody, 10 years ago, I said we have 10 years to manage this problem. I'm now saying we have 5 years to manage this problem. So what we do over the next 5 years, what we continue doing, what we plan to do, what we actually begin doing will determine the future of humanity for the next millennia. I really believe that, because we have been dithering through the COP process beginning in 1992. One agreement in 2015, and it was actually a soft agreement. Right? Soft because we had nationally determined contributions from each country being involved in reaching that. We had to do it to get an agreement. And so we got that agreement and we said 1.5 degrees if at all possible and no more. Does anyone believe that we're on track to get that when emissions are still rising? Over the last year, emissions fell by 7%. But we all know that's because of COVID-19. That's not because of deliberate government action. But what is interesting is to ask a question. Here we are communicating with Zoom. Right? We are able to communicate globally. You're all from different parts of the world. And I'm spending my days now communicating in this way with the whole world. How much more efficient is that than traveling around the world? And how much less strain is it on the individual? You know, I know that some travel is critically important because meeting you in this way is very two-dimensional. I would like to meet you three-dimensionally and actually be able to read body language more clearly than I can here, because this is part of listening, by the way, is checking that people are understanding you by looking at their body language. And it's more difficult on Zoom. So I think the advantages of reaching out in this way, why should we ever go back to traveling as much as we were to manage these problems? We've learnt, Zoom was there before, but we've learnt how to use it. Skype was there for many years, but now we've really got used to it. Let's make good use of that. But more than that, we now need government leaders to understand this is the biggest challenge they have ever had to face up to. And the government leaders in the past have been able to say to themselves, I'm only in this job for 5-10 years, and we can leave that difficult job to the people who come after me. That's why I'm keen to explain. We have wasted so much time since 1992 when we began international discussions on this. It's only 5 years left for us to get all these things in place, which is why I left government in 2017, because I thought I could do better coming back to my old University of Cambridge and set up the Centre for Climate Repair. And I'm reaching out around the world. We are setting up ourselves as a hub, a global hub for climate repair activity around the world. And when I say hub, we have universities like Stanford on board. We have the University of Hawaii on board. We have Tsinghua University in China, the Goa Marine Studies Institute in India, and so it goes, right? So what we have to do is act as a hub to pull people together on this enormous mission to see that we create a manageable world for the future. Let me say, it is important to put both sides of the issue before people, by which I mean, why am I saying 5 years and only 5 years? Right? So I need to explain that, but I also only explain it in advance of saying, and I'm going to give you a solution, right? So I think the first thing is to say, actually, what is happening just in one part of the world, I could mention others, is threatening the whole world. And that part of the world is the Arctic Circle. And I have formed and this is for your private information, and I know it's going out quite widely, but that's all right. I have formed a climate crisis advisory group of 14 people, and I'm the chairperson of this group, and we are having monthly public meetings. So our first public meeting will be on the 24th of this month, 12 noon UK time, every month, the last Thursday of the month, we will be in the public domain. These people are drawn from around the world, and we have an expert from India, we have an expert from China, etc. But each of these experts were drawn carefully so that we get a balance of expertise in climate science, but also so that we get a balance of ethnicity, that we get a balance of male, female. And I do have a chap sitting up there in the Arctic Circle region from northern Finland. Now, as you know, northern Finland is very close to the North Pole. And this chap is a professor at the University of East Finland. It's a very, very small university, but he is an indigenous person. He's a member of the Sami tribe who live on the ice, like the Inuit people in Canada. He is our representative of indigenous people of the world, and he's in communication with people in forests and so on around the world. I spoke to him, Tero is his name, on Tuesday evening this week, and I had previously spoken to him 2 weeks before, and I said, how are things there? And he said, well, the temperature's about minus 30 degrees centigrade, which is normal. So he said, actually, it's a bit warmer than usual. I said, fine. So when I called him on Tuesday evening, how's the weather? He said, well, today it's 30 degrees. I said, minus. No, he said, plus. And he said, yesterday it was 35. This was the hottest part of Europe for that whole week period, and it still is. So what is happening in the Arctic Circle region is that the Arctic sea ice that was covering the Arctic Sea with ice for hundreds of thousands of years has been melting, but it's been melting much more quickly than we anticipated. And the net result is that today, 50% of the Arctic Sea is exposed to sunlight during the Arctic summer. And it's the Arctic summer right now, which means that the sun is shining there 24 hours of the day. It's the white night period is what they describe it as. And so the temperature rise is going up each year. Last year, the average temperature in the whole of the Arctic Circle region was 3.5 degrees centigrade above the pre-industrial level. So the rest of the planet is at 1.1, 1.2, but the Arctic Circle region is just going way up. 30, 35 degrees centigrade. I said, Tero, is there any ice there? He said, no, the ice is gone. And the ice is what we live on. And he means it's a part of our life. How do their animals survive? How do their deers and so on? So it's a massive crisis. But sitting in the Arctic Sea is Greenland. When the ice melts on the sea, sea levels don't go up. But when ice melts on Greenland, when it's all gone, global sea levels average will rise by 7.5 meters. 7.5 meters. And you can imagine the map of the world will be dramatically changed. Every one of our global cities will be gone well before that time. Now, here's the consequence. We've been looking at what will happen in 2050. Whenever anyone talks about 2100, they say, well, it's way in the future. I'm looking at you young people here. Some of you will be around in 2100. But let's talk about 2050 when maybe all of you will be around. Not me. I might live to 110, but let's see. But anyway, if we take 2050, which part of the world do we think would be most impacted by rising sea levels? Southeast Asia. Right? Southeast Asia is the answer. This is a deep analysis. And so this most recent analysis shows that by 2050, Calcutta will no longer be a livable city. Bangladesh, 2/3 underwater, right? No longer livable at all for 2/3 of the country. And what about Vietnam? Very little is heard about Vietnam. Those of you who know will know that Vietnam is a delta. It's the Mekong Delta. The Mekong River has been putting silt down and creating the country of Vietnam. The whole of Vietnam is a delta from the Mekong River. And it's the biggest rice paddy fields in the region, right? Now, third rice producer in the world. Well before 2050, once a year, 90% of Vietnam landmass will be under seawater. Right? As soon as it's under seawater once, that's the end of rice production from that area. Across the water from there, Indonesia. Indonesia is an archipelago. Right? It means it's full of islands which are close to sea level. And a lot of the rice production from Indonesia is close to sea level. Same problem. Jakarta, January, February this year, was underwater. It was flooded. And the government of Indonesia understands. Jakarta hasn't got much longer to go, and they're now planning a new city for the capital on higher land, which is a wise move on their part. But look at that, the investment that has gone into that wonderful, bustling, big city of Jakarta. If anyone's been there, you will know what I'm talking about. And it's a modern city that's emerged out of the tiger economy that has been growing there. The investment has mostly taken place over the last 20 years. And that investment will not yield a future for Indonesia. So, Calcutta, Jakarta, but around the other side of India, Mumbai. Anyone who's been to Mumbai knows how vulnerable that is to sea level rise. Now, the reason why this part of the world is so much at risk is because there are a lot of typhoons in that area. And where do typhoons pick up their energy from? From heat of the oceans. And as the oceans are warming up, we're seeing record intensity typhoons. We all know the Philippines has suffered twice from the most intense typhoons on record in recent years. And so storms at sea means the water incurses further. It's not just a stable sea level we're talking about. It's the fact that as it rises a little bit even, not even half a meter, risks the whole of Vietnam going under with a typhoon coming through. Right? So what we're talking about is maybe 100 million, maybe 300 million climate refugees in Southeast Asia alone by mid-century. That's just 30 years from now. So what it's a very long answer to your question, Cherry, but let me just say, I think it's so important to get this message across. 5 years I'm talking about in order to get in place deep and rapid emissions reduction, There is no excuse for continued discovery of new oil places to put in oil wells around the world. There's actually no excuse for further coal mining. We need to set in train processes in every country. I don't want to say, coal miners, you're out of work. We need government action to manage this process in the quickest possible time, to move people away from coal mining, to move away from building new infrastructure into the fossil fuel sector. Infrastructure is there for 70 years plus. We all know that. We're still going over bridges that were built hundreds of years ago, right? So we just need to avoid creating assets that are not going to yield any profits in the future because they're irrelevant. Now, all of that needs to happen. Deep and rapid emissions reduction. 51 billion tons a year of greenhouse gases being emitted now. We just have to bring that as close to zero as possible, as quickly as possible. Secondly, greenhouse gas removal at scale. We've put too much up there. I think a safe level for a future for humanity is 350 parts per million or less. So let's aim to get the atmosphere back down to those levels. That's a project that we're heavily working on at the Climate Repair Center and working with partners around the world on this project. We're not looking at any process that would remove less than 1 billion tons a year, but the biggest process we're looking at might remove 30 billion tons a year. Right? So what are we doing? We're really focusing our efforts on the oceans. The oceans are 70% of the world's surface. How much work is being done on capturing greenhouse gases in the ocean? It's just about plumb zero. So we're just busy filling that gap right now. There's a third action that is required. We have to stop what's happening in the Arctic, the Himalayas, and the Antarctic. How do we set about refreezing them? Sounds like an impossible problem, doesn't it? Problems aren't impossible to engineers. What you need to discuss is not what everyone is hammering on about, geoengineering. This isn't. We are focusing on adapting natural processes from nature, right? So what we're doing in terms of refreezing the Arctic is looking at what happens when there's a storm at sea. You create a very fine spray of sea water, and each of those droplets of water contain a very small amount of sodium chloride. And when the wind takes that up into the upper atmosphere, you either create a cloud or it lands on a cloud, and the cloud is whitened. It becomes very bright. So we're working on this to artificially use this process, pumping seawater in very fine droplets into this atmosphere and then using winds to do exactly what I've described. And if we do that for 3 months in the Arctic summer to cover the Arctic Sea with white cloud cover, we can reflect sunlight away. We keep the layer of ice that's grown during the winter intact, and then every year we repeat that process. And I think we have to repeat that until we're at 350 parts per million. So, this is a broad strategy that I think manages everything. Refreezing the Himalayas, I don't have the answer to that because getting white cloud cover up there is not going to be that easy. So we just need to focus on each of these challenges. As we know, as we lose ice from land, the Himalayan ice, for example, the rivers that we depend on for the spring growing season would be drying up. The source of that is the snow that fell in the previous winter and that melts every year and forms the runoff. So, and I don't need to say to people in Asia how important that is in the entire Asian region. So, Chiri, I've answered your question in a far too long way, but thank you.
Thank you so much for that great answer. I've always found all these innovations so interesting, like what you were talking about, the white cloud cover or carbon dioxide removal from the atmosphere. I think it makes me really hopeful that there are solutions we can implement. Thank you so much. I would now like to hand it over to Komal Mittal from India, who will be asking the next question.
Thank you, Anna. Thank you, sir, for explaining us the importance of climate and importance of taking the actions. As you mentioned that we have a very short timeline to change these transitions, and we need to start working now. We need to start taking actions now. So my question to you is, how can a global climate alliance of nations and states to address climate change be formed, and how can this alliance promote climate repair?
Again, these questions are all so good. So you see, you could immediately say, but wait a minute, we've got the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change. How effective is that? There's the problem. Now, I can tell you that in the run-up to COP21 in Paris, I was concerned about this issue. And so I set up something that's called Mission Innovation. And the idea was to invite countries willing to join Mission Innovation to join. But to join Mission Innovation, each country had to promise to jointly with the other nations that join, spend $30 billion a year of public money on the new technologies needed in a post-fossil fuel world. Right, so this was to stimulate the private sector or de-risk these new technologies for the private sector. And $30 billion was the objective. This year, we are likely to be spending $30 billion under that project. So we managed to get 22 countries to join, and China and India are there, the European Union, Great Britain, United States, Australia, etc., all joined up. So these 25 countries that are now there represent 80% of global GDP. Right? So I'm just saying your question is spot on, because if you can get willing nations to act in concert with each other, we can create the future we want. In other words, the remaining 20% may find it difficult. And I think, for example, Nigeria would find it very difficult to join such a venture because their entire economy depends on oil production. And so I think it is likely that Nigeria will just be a follower. Now, as we move forward, what I'm trying to do is see that those countries, the 25 countries, begin not only to put public money into this venture, but also to join hands politically to create the alliance that would make a global difference. Now, what do I mean by that? I'm in discussions with one of the big banks based here in London about the cap and trade process. The cap and trade process was first introduced in Britain in the year 2004. And we turned to Rothschild's bank for advice on how to introduce this. And I'm talking to the same group of people at Rothschild now, 17 years later, about managing the process in a better way. The cap and trade process is based on emissions from the manufacturing process. If you have a manufacturing process and you emit carbon dioxide, you get charged for that as a tax. And the cap and trade meant you could trade off with other companies. If they had gone under the barrier, you could trade off with them. And that process has been extremely difficult to manage. So I go back to Rothschild's and I say, how do we make an easier process? And they said, well, quite simply, we should be charging the production of oil, coal, and gas, because it's those elements that are the main source of carbon dioxide emissions. Don't look at the manufacturing process, look at the production of those materials. And so they have produced a paper, and we are involved in it with them. And that paper has been sent to John Kerry and to Xie Zhenhua in China, the leading two negotiators on climate change of those two countries, in particular, because I see them as now being capable of providing the leadership the world needs. And there has been an interesting response from the American petroleum industries, the API. They have said they would welcome this. It is really quite astonishing. And maybe we should worry. Maybe they can see loopholes. I don't know. But whatever it is, I think this is the idea that might gain traction with the group of willing nations. The United Nations requires everyone to agree. It would only take Nigeria and Saudi Arabia to put up their hands against this proposal, and then it's quashed. So I think it's the willing nations that ought to come forward and do this. Now, that in itself is, I agree, a very big challenge, but nevertheless, it would really sharpen the rate with which we reduce our emissions. So again, your question, spot on. I think that relying entirely on the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, however important it is, because it brings us all together for those discussions, is simply not going to be the way forward. We need a much quicker way to move the political system. And we also, by the way, need a quicker way to move the financial system. And so I'm talking to leading banks around the world. And the interesting point is, 5 years ago, I wouldn't have been able to have these discussions. Now the banks realize that actually, and this is a point I made to them, there's no point being a bank in a dead world. There is a good point in being a good bank in a living world, right? So if you want that, you're going to have to invest in it.
Thank you so much for that amazing answer. I really liked what you said about being a good bank, because I think we as users of banks, sometimes we don't realize that where we put our money is important, and we give, as consumers, we give power to the decisions we make. So it's so important to really spread this message about that there are good banks and banks that are not so good, and that we need to make decisions according to this. For our final question, I would like to ask about what you think the goals for this upcoming COP and your expectations for the COP would be.
I'm much more optimistic about the outcome of this COP than I was a year ago. And the reason is very simple. Biden has taken a much stronger line on climate change than I think most of us anticipated. I know John Kerry very well because he was the lead climate negotiator in the last negotiations in Paris. And he also knows Xie Zhenhua in China very well, because Zhenhua also was the chief negotiator for China at that time. Here's an interesting point. When Biden announced John Kerry's leadership in the climate negotiations for the United States, the same day, President Xi Jinping announced bringing Zhenhua out of retirement. That was a signal, a deliberate signal to America that China wants to work with you on getting a good agreement in COP26 in Glasgow. Now, it is unfortunate that the Biden has inherited a very negative attitude towards China in the United States, not only from the previous government, but it's been building up for a while. And it is just unfortunate that this might get in the way. But if you imagine a leadership program set out by the United States together with China, I think anything could happen at COP26. Right? Those two are the global leaders today. Let me count India in as well. My goodness, if we could get India to join those two and the European Union will be there, no question of that, I think then it's a slam dunk. Right, so I do think that there's a reason for more optimism about COP26, but, and this is a very important but, anyone who's been connected with the UNFCCC for any length of time, not even, you don't have to be in there for 20 years as I have, will know what a slow moving process it is. We're just a few months away. And I think the cast has probably died on what we can get out of COP26. In other words, the negotiations are a bit of a sham. Everyone treats it as a talking shop. They arrive with their positions in cast iron. Very difficult to move away from that. And I fear that the atmosphere created by President Trump, and I would say Bolsonaro in Brazil, you know, it's not only one country, has poisoned the atmosphere for real action, the sort of action that is required. But I still feel optimistic. And I come back to the question that was previously asked by Kamal, which is, can we get the willing nations to act? And that is my objective at COP26. So that Mission Innovation Group that was formed was actually formed on the first day of COP21 in Paris. We set it up outside the main meeting, and we just put up a big banner saying Mission Innovation, and we had 22 heads of government standing under the banner. Now, I would like to recover that on the first day of COP26, but also getting heads of government, not ministers of energy there, to stand under the banner and say, now we commit ourselves to political action, joint political action. Can I just very quickly say, I am involved in discussions of this kind literally around the world day after day. This has been really the best. You guys asked such sharp, important questions, and I just want to thank you for that.
On the contrary, thank you so much for being here with us. And I think I speak for everyone when I say that I've learned so much from this conversation, and it has been really, really insightful. So it's an honor for us to have the chance to be a part of these conversations.
Let's take it beyond a conversation. Let's see if we can all pull together. And this is what I'm really keen to do. So do come back to me. Okay, thank you very much.
Definitely.
Thank you.
Definitely.
Thank you so much, Dave. This has been absolutely inspiring, and I want to thank you on behalf of the entire POP family. And we would love to be able to take this forward and to continue to learn from you and to be able to do more. Especially as I know the window of opportunity is small, but we're all ready and wanting to work together. And I know with your insights, we'll be able to do a lot. So we're eagerly looking forward to the future together. And thank you once again for this extremely insightful conversation. And thank you for being a part of the POP family. We're so grateful. We take away the deepest values that you've shared with us, and a great deal of insight around the most important things for us to focus on as we go forward.
Well, thank you. Thank you. And let me say, delighted that this is in respect of Patchy, your father.
Thank you. It means the world to us. Thank you ever so much. And we are looking forward to continuing this conversation and to doing lots more together. Thank you, Dave.
Thank you. Take care,
Thank
all
you,
of you.
Thank you so very much.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
POP family, to all of
Take
you.
care.
And thank you for being family. Thank you. Bye.